Trump Department of Justice remains obsessed with hiring January 6th rioters, stormers, coup participants, and also with punishing the prosecutors that originally tried to bring them to justice. This is another episode of Pragmatic Optimists. I'm attorney Rachel Cohen, and I'm joined by Rhode Island State Senator Tiara Mack. And today we're going to talk about two kind of parallel reports that broke last week related to January 6th. The first is that the Trump administration is unsurprisingly engaged in a mass purge of Department of Justice employees that worked on January 6th prosecutions. It includes active firings and also some kind of embarrassing demotions for people that used to run departments or run practices, now doing first year intake level work. The second is that NPR broke another new hire of the Department of Justice who's working on the weaponization working group headed by Ed Martin, who was outside the Capitol on January 6th, represented a number of January 6th rioters. And while he was doing so as their defense attorney, not to demonize any defense attorney, everyone deserves representation, but went on multiple podcasts talking about how the prosecution of January 6thers was equivalent to the Holocaust, saying just really absolutely deranged shit about whether or not these were politicized prosecutions, but specifically about the government like rounding people up and punishing them a la this horrific genocide. And so we have been talking extensively about the DOJ's affinity for people who are intimately involved with January 6th. And it brings to mind a lot of kind of, I would say, analogies, but they aren't really equivalent, Tiara, in terms of how other people with criminal records navigate our system.
Yeah, Rachel, I think the thing that stands out to me the most is as someone who has worked on state level policy related to justice for people with criminal backgrounds and limiting the impacts of people with prior convictions, whether it's accessing housing and preventing them from being less stably housed by banning background checks for people who are gainfully employed and can pay their rent, but may have a criminal record from their youth or for a different time in their life when they weren't as either stably employed or stably housed as they are now, and not letting that impact their ability to find affordable housing in their communities, or whether that's things like banning the box in criminal background checks or criminal inquiries before someone has applied to application, or finding other organizations and employers that are willing to employ people gainfully who have prior records. It is also not lost on me that there are plenty of communities around the country. Illinois, another reason why I'm jealous that you currently live in Chicago. The Chicago City Council has passed a resolution banning anyone from January 6th from being employed in the city of Chicago, and the state of Illinois has also prevented anyone from being able to be employed in the state of Illinois if they participated in the January 6th riots. Additionally, Representative Kamlager-Dove also introduced an amendment earlier this year to prevent any funds from the budget being used to employ anyone who was also participating in January 6th. That amendment unfortunately failed at the federal level. But these are some of the policy considerations, because as someone who works at the state level and as someone who cares deeply about the system of criminal injustice in our country, there are so many people that are impacted by criminal records. And these January 6 rioters who did kill or did result in the deaths of 4 people, including one person who died the day after and injured 144 officers. For the party of law and order, these MAGA zealots have somehow forgotten their commitment to upholding the law and have let people who have participated in the death of individuals and the harm of police officers who they love to claim that they stand behind from having any type of consequences. So I'm glad that there are city level and state level policies that people who are listening to our show can turn to encourage their elected officials at the local level and state level to introduce in their communities to hold these January 6 rioters accountable, because it was an awful moment in our nation. And I believe that we have still not gotten the level of accountability that we need from those individuals. But Rachel, can you talk a little bit more about what does it mean for someone who participated in the January 6 riot, convicted, and found guilty of criminal assault and trespassing, to now be working in the Department of Justice?
Absolutely. So in that instance, we're talking about a guy named Jared Rice, who is on camera, and I will need to just triple check if he was convicted, but some of the footage that was played at his trial shows him on camera encouraging people, chanting to kill cops who
Mm-hmm.
are Capitol Police officers attempting to protect the Capitol in this moment. And I think just to put a particularly fine point on where these people are being hired into, it's this weaponization working group, which is where Donald Trump alleges that there's been all of this lawfare waged against his administration, and that that's what January 6th, what he's referred to it, what is it? I believe he's called it a day of love. Like this reframe of January 6th as peaceful protests is something that I'm really focusing on and harping on and bringing up a lot, because this was an attempted coup. And we are now having people who participated in the attempted coup be installed in positions of power in the Department of Justice to target other people that have spoken up against the Trump administration. We're seeing FBI raids. We're seeing lots and lots of arrests of Democratic politicians, not, by the weaponization working group, but all under this big umbrella of what Donald Trump and his Department of quote unquote justice is working towards. And I think, to your point about the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois banning January 6th rioters from taking city jobs or excuse me, for being hired for city jobs or state jobs, what really stands out to me is the different treatment for people who engaged in an attempted coup, who are now being hired into the highest levels of government, where there is a real reason, there's a connection between your actions in this and why you should not be employed in government, versus everyday Americans who have convictions, violent or nonviolent, that are very divorced from the jobs that they are applying to. There's very rarely consideration about when those convictions were from. And so it's not it's a completely unreasonable thing for employers, particularly in specific jobs, to consider specific types of convictions when they are deciding whether or not someone is a qualified candidate. But people with criminal records in the United States across the board, if they are for anything other than storming the Capitol, face incredible discrimination in terms of access to jobs, to housing, to the types of things that make it so that they do not recommit, reoffend. And I think that there's no real connection other than a deep desire for punishment to have these kind of nebulous tests of whether or not someone is a criminal in order to access capital and housing. And there's a very clear connection as to why people in government should not be former attempted coup members. And so I think that there's lots to continue to pay attention to here, because unfortunately, I suspect that we will continue to learn more about it. It's almost feeling like it was a loyalty test for Donald Trump at this point, right? And so it's a pro to have been at the Capitol on January 6th because he knows that you would be willing to literally commit treason for him. And it's a little bit of a pessimistic takeaway in this exact moment. We're going to continue to report on it and bring it back and analyze it for y'all, because I think that it is one of the most important things to be tracking as we consider Donald Trump's authoritarian tendencies. But do we have some optimism for our listeners today?
So one of the things that's keeping me optimistic, again, at the state and local level, is policy that is informed by these January 6 rioters. And I think also many more people are going to be holding their elected officials accountable. There have been some people who participated in January 6 who are running for office, both at local, state, and at the congressional level. And then there are so many more people who are not standing for January 6 rioters who are also running for office and who are running to be dissenting voices. There is a lot happening. We are quickly approaching the midterms. I think before we know it, we'll be waking up to a whole slate of individuals who are running to unseat people. And there's going to be a lot of chatter about some of the races that we have looking forward to. And I hope some of the things that people are looking for is accountability, both in our congressional delegations, in our states, for how are we going to have a narrative that January 6th was an anomaly. We took way too long to address the convictions of these folks. And then we allowed a felonious president to come back into power and allow those criminals to get back into our communities. Some some of which went to perpetrate more harm in our communities. And it really forces the question, especially for people who are now starting to see the edges of this unfair criminal justice system that we built in our country, where we are talking about criminals in DC sending and I know this is a different conversation than what we started with, but sending National Guard troops from states that have higher criminal records and increases in crime than the city of DC, and targeting majority Black and majority Democratic cities. I think so many more Americans are starting to be frustrated with the headlines that they're seeing and are really thinking about, well, if these are the types of criminals we have in our community, what can I do in order to make sure someone who committed what I like to call a crime of survival, whether that is stealing food in order to make sure that their children are able to eat, or someone who was at a completely different place in their life now has the tools to either apply for an apartment without fear that they'll be denied because of a criminal record from 5, 10, 15, 20 years ago, or other communities that are looking at other legislation like banning the box or creating workforce incentive programs both inside of our prison systems, which I hate to say, but making sure that we're increasing the wages of people who are currently incarcerated and not using that as another way of free and or reduce labor forces in our communities. But I think it requires vigilance. As someone who's working at the state level, in my state, I can tell you that we've increased the amount of misdemeanors that we've had since 2020, only because we have lost sight and we've lost our North Star that our current criminal system is broken, and that too many people, particularly low income Black and brown people, the criminalization of homeless people is running rampant, and we must change those narratives. And I think there are more people that are making and connecting the dots between criminalizing of homeless people, keeping people in a system of poverty, and keeping people in a system that they cannot get out of, and changing that. But it is a little bit bleak, Rachel. I'm not going to lie. Watching Wise in a video saying, kill them, kill them, kill them, comparing state capital or the Capitol Police to Gestapo and Nazis is a crazy thing that we are seeing in our lifetime. But I hope that as more people are resigning from the DOJ, as there are more people who are literally just loyalists and not there to be an independent branch of our government and hold that checks and balances on our federal government, we're going to continue to see the erosion of our criminal and legal system. But it requires every single person on the ground, people like you, people like me, and people like our Praggies, to continue to interrogate the system and say, what the fuck, every single day, and not accept this as like the norm.
Absolutely. So it is a little bleak, but we will be back with additional pragmatic optimism, hopefully, and sometimes some pragmatic realism here on Legal AF on our personal social media channels, Cohen 489 and Mack District 6. And make sure to like, subscribe, and follow along over here on Legal AF. Good to see you.
Bye, Praggies.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.